And hey everyone, it's Evan Kirstel here. I have quite a band of brothers, miscreants, gathered here today to chat about what the heck is going on with CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, the Olympics of Consumer Electronics that happens in January every year like clockwork. But will it happen this year? I guess so. Who knows? Why don't we go around the table? David, introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you?
Oh, God, good question. I'm David Danto. I'm a technologist that works for Poly here in central New Jersey, and just living the high life. What can I say?
Living the dream. Jim Harris, our Canadian guest. Always welcome Canadians around here. So, hello, say hi, Jim.
Hello, hello from the Great White North.
Allegedly, there's a country up there, but I've heard rumors. And Doug from the great state of Virginia / DC area. How are you?
I'm feeling good, feeling cautiously optimistic.
Wow, you're one. So let's dive right in. CES. If you're going, raise your hand. If you're going to CES, wow, 50%. That's great. When exactly, David, do you plan to drop out? Is it tomorrow or Sunday?
I've been having these chats online almost constantly over the last couple of days, and
All
I
right. So
think I
set the
brought
scene for us, though, because you are the grandfather, the godfather, unofficially, of CES. You've been to like 30 years worth. What's on your mind?
Well, we talked about it a little bit the last time that I'm all for people trying to be safe, and if they don't feel safe going, they shouldn't go. We talked about the last time how we were very upset that news media and news organizations were deciding that they were going to be news instead of report the news. And if you could cover, the Olympics or the wars, you could probably manage to cover a little CES show. But that all aside, I'm just watching how the schedules are changing. I'm really kind of at the point now, although literally just as we were coming onto the broadcast, I got another email from a company saying they've made some changes. They're no longer hosting the happy hour, and their press conference is now completely virtual. So, there are still companies dropping out on a day-to-day basis. What I've said online is if the flight leaves, if my plane actually does depart, with a healthy crew and I can get there, then even if I'm only attending, the CES Trends to Watch, followed by, CES Unveiled, and then PepCom and Showstoppers the following 2 nights, even if it's only those 4 things, it's very worthwhile the trip for me to see what's
All
going
right.
on in the
Well, I was
industry and what's
once
going on with
optimistic
trends.
like you. This was 4 days ago. I was really an optimist, living the CES dream. Jim, now you were once like me and optimistic. What happened? Tell us what changed your mind about going to the CES. What was it? Our country in general, or was it something Vegas in particular?
Well, first off, as a Canadian, I have to show a negative test to get onto a plane to come back. And if I can't show
Silly
a negative,
Canadians.
yeah, silly. If I can't show a negative test, I have to quarantine in Vegas for 2 weeks. Now,
Bring your wallet. Bring your wallet. Bring cash.
They say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and the Canadians want that to really be the case. You got Omicron in Vegas, it has to stay in Vegas. So not only do I have to quarantine for 2 weeks, I have to then go to a doctor and get a doctor's note saying I'm clear of COVID, and then come home, and then I have to have another test. And for some people from other countries, they have to do all that, and then they have to quarantine in their countries. So if you're from South Korea, like LG, or a number of other companies, you have, regardless of your vaccine status, regardless of your COVID negative tests, you have to quarantine for another 10 days, I believe it is. So if you're an executive from a South Korean company, you're looking at 2 weeks of quarantine in Vegas if you get it, and 10 days of quarantine at home. You're killing the better part of a month. So it's putting a little damper on it. And Dave mentioned about the airlines. when COVID hit, airline stocks were down by 85% because just a collapse in passenger travel. So they furloughed all their staff. So they're working on bare bones staff the ones who've been furloughed or laid off had to get other jobs. So they're working on very thin crews, and every crew who gets a test positive for COVID is out of commission for 2 weeks. So we're seeing thousands of flights canceled all across the US and internationally because of staffing problems on the flight crews. So it's like, if you're lucky enough not to get Omicron, because it's very highly transmissible, you might be stuck in Vegas even if you didn't get Omicron. So
all right. Well, thank you, Jim, for the international perspective. But really, who cares? We're number one. USA number one. USA number one in COVID cases. That's what I was trying to say.
Oh, okay.
But Doug, you've been all along. You've been insistent on going. I'm not sure what's going on at home where you feel you must escape. I suspect anything short of a nuclear device detonating on the Strip would stop you from going. I mean, you are really insistent that you are going to be there.
I'm willing to bet that the staff of the Consumer Technology Association has a cache of weapons somewhere just in case a zombie apocalypse breaks out at this point. I will say that I share David's concerns about air travel in terms of getting to and from Vegas. If they're the weakest link, and it will have an impact on overall CES attendance, will probably be the disruption of airline service. That's going to be an interesting factor to see, and I'm sure CTA is recalculating their numbers even as we speak, factoring that in. But I'll say that I think that when they start talking about CES, we have to. The discussion is going to be very brutal next week because you've already baked in prior to Omicron swinging into high gear, you'd already baked in like 60% because of the international factors that Jim mentioned, as well as general skepticism on, I don't have to be at CES, or I can be at CES virtually, whatever that means, and so forth. So now we've gone from a high of, I'll say, 180-ish thousand people, which was 2 years ago, 179, slowly declining, but different story, different day. 180-ish. So you slap that out. So now we're down to 40% of that. And then Omicron has come out, and whatever that attendance number here, which was like, I think between 60 to 70,000 people pre, 30, if I had to place bets on Vegas, I'd say probably it'll be a show in the neighborhood of 30,000-ish, more or less. And because the international people are you're taking hits from international, further hits from international, with people closing off the borders or worrying about getting stranded in the U.S.
So let me ask you, Doug, of that 30,000, what percent do you think will get COVID?
Okay, if I
I'm kidding. You don't
data,
answer that.
No, I'll give you an answer. It'll be like 1%.
Oh, wow.
It'll be there 2 weeks ago. Well, 3 weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago, there was a large conference run by American Geophysical Union in New Orleans, and this was like just at the cusp between COVID, between Omicron and Delta, and AGU imposed a vaccination mandate. All attendees had to be vaccinated, same as CES. And B, everybody had to wear a mask at official events. And the self-reported data, and of course, AGU is made up of scientists and God knows everybody wants to get in everybody else's paper. So the self-reported thing was there about, out of 10,000 attendees, there were about 100 more or less that caught COVID there. And a lot of the secondary digging in, because there were some people who were want to say, super spreader event, AGU 21, because you always got the one guy in the crowd that wants to call it a super spreader event. But most of you dig through the data a little bit more, and some of the commentary indicates that the people who caught COVID were people who were, took off their masks and they got into a non-sponsored event. And, and the other key here is that you take off your mask, it's like it's open season for COVID because it's about as transmissible as measles, depending upon who you talk to. So if you're in a small crowded room, you take off your mask, it's like.
Well, the good news, I've never seen anyone in Vegas take off their mask, so we're all safe. But David, you will be fully masked.
Absolutely. I just wrote a blog.
I trust you will be very safe. Is that right?
I just wrote a blog about, the concept of masking, and I don't care where you are in the political spectrum, but, if you wear an N95 or a KN95 mask, cover yourself pretty well. In some cases, double mask. I was just, for some routine medical tests today, and, they're wearing their N95 and they're wearing surgical masks over them, not because they need the extra mask, but they want to be able to preserve their N95. If you're wearing this stuff, honestly, you're not getting sick. Unless you're in an indoor location with your mask off, sharing this, you're generally going to be fine. And one of the things I was lamenting in the blog that I just wrote that comes out tomorrow was that how amazing it is that people are so stupid that they just won't mask up, either for lack of courtesy or lack of knowledge or lack of interest. But then I talked about how the positive side of that is that never in the history of mankind have we had visible idiot indicators from people. All you have to do is see somebody wearing a mask without their nose being covered or not wearing a mask at all. That's an idiot. You can avoid them. Don't get into friendly conversation. Don't get into anything. So again, if you want to stay home and not take chances, I totally respect that. If you want to go and you're wearing appropriate masks on airplanes and airports and crowded places, you're not eating in indoor restaurants, and you're staying masked up indoors all over the place, you're going to be fine.
That sounds so fun. This is the best part of Vegas, I tell you.
Anybody who tells you that CES was fun and not work is lying to you anyway.
That was me. I loved it. It was so much fun.
Well,
but Jim,
that's because...
so masking aside, what were you looking forward to at CES? I mean, you're a longtime CES. Are you still looking forward to the content, to the actual tech on display?
That was always one of the great things for me, to go through Eureka Park, which is all the tiny little startups. I'd spend, half a day always at Eureka Park. French Tech had a huge presence there, and you'd see really interesting things, like things that weren't ready for prime time, but they were ideas, and you could say, wow, I saw that thing first. I remember a couple of years ago, I did a video of a woman who was the VP of this company called Punty, and it was the first ever blockchain and Android dual OS smartphone. So
that really took off.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. Like, it's maybe 7 years ahead of prime time, but you were there when you saw. I remember seeing a guy in the media thing walking around with this helmet on with a big honking camera strap. He was from Japan, and he was videotaping everything. And like, you go, no nerd is going to walk around with a construction helmet with this, but you go. And then years later, you have Google Glass, right? That embeds the cameras in the corners of the thing. And what you were really seeing was the use case. Like, the form was terrible. No designer, no self-respecting, millennial would ever wear this contraption. But what you were seeing was the use case for something that would eventually evolve. And you go back and you go, that guy looked totally idiotic, but hey, this is really AR, augmented reality, which we're all going to have eventually on the inside of our glasses. So both recording and displaying. So you were seeing something in its nascent form that was inelegant. But if you really pay attention to this stuff, you can see where things might move in the future. And this Jim, is what's really exciting.
Jim, that's really it for me, is that, you see some devices for the first time, you get some samples for the first time. It's really that 50,000 foot view to see where things are going. That becomes, you really can't do that any other place.
Yeah, I think that, virtual we found what the limitations of virtual were. Because what you're going to do is we're going to see a lot of filtering through the news people that aren't going to be there of their contacts, their associations with PR companies, and you're going to have a very filtered view of CES this year because they're all covering it virtually, which basically means that they scheduled a press. They've been scheduling press calls prior to the show, and what you're going to see is a lot of prepackaged content, and that's unfortunate. I gotta lean with Jim and Dave here a little bit. I'm looking forward to Eureka Park, and God bless all the international people that are in Las Vegas now, because they've been setting up and they're stuck there, and they're in it for the long haul. And I think that it's going to be very interesting to see and talk to, from 6 feet away, of course, but talk to the people from Europe and Japan and South Korea. South Korea, I'm not sure if they've gone all virtual or not, but the different international pavilions and Eureka Park, and kind of get the gauge for where they are at in terms of how do they feel on being in CES. And I think that part of the reason why CES has not pulled the plug is due to the fact that their international partners have said we are comfortable with the safety protocols in place, and we're here, so we're going to make the most of it. And I'm looking forward to see that. I'd also like to point out that for as many companies, there's been kind of this death watch. Who will pull out of CES today? And Dave, I don't know if the company you were referring to was Bosch, but I got an email this morning and Bosch was like, well, we're not going to do an in-person precedent. We're going to do all virtual. And that was probably the first time in this cascade of, well, we're going to cancel, where I kind of sat there and went, because I was hoping to see Bosch there. It's been,
well, at some point events overtake your best laid plans. I mean,
yeah,
we hit a record 470,000 cases in a day, I think, in the last 24 hours. And you could argue what a case is, and then, but when it hits 1 million, that'll be another milestone. And then when it's Omicron is only half of the cases. So when it hits 2, so at some point, it's going to be like, okay, what point do we just still full speed ahead, regardless of circumstances,
Evan, I think that this will be the last show, any major trade show you'll see. This will be it's rushing. It's going to be the last thing before you see the door close, in terms of large events over the next 90 from first quarter. I mean, I'll go ahead and say that with some confidence because of the way the numbers are. But basically, it's a numbers game. 2 weeks from now, I suspect everybody's going to be staying a lot closer to home than they are like next week. Just due to you look at the numbers and you kind of extrapolate from that. Well, where is airline travel going to be, and where are other can I get other factors involved?
Yeah, well, it's going to be fun for me to kind of watch you guys travel to Vegas and almost
we're going to be
Squid
paying
Game
attention,
fashion.
Dave and Doug.
You're going to be our eyes and ears.
Thank you for this service.
Well,
yeah,
I've
we're going to strap a camera to your head.
I've covered CES for, as you pointed out, Evan, about 30 years at this point now, and I always routinely ignore the big stories. The ones that set up booths that are the size of 3 and 4 and 5 football fields. There's plenty of media to cover those. I'm looking to uncover the little things. Like look at this little the little thing from a small company called Lytra. A little video light that you could put on. Who thought that anybody would be using video lights going forward in the future? Now all of a sudden, it's what we live with. So finding the little things and the trends and seeing what's going on, that's really what I attend for.
Well, that's interesting. Do you think the little guys are going to be there? Because all we've heard about are
yes.
big names
dropping
out.
Out of that, well, okay, first of all, there's 2,200 people there. And when the big name, there's been a handful of big names that dropped out, number one. But number two, I was talking with a guy today And I was talking to a guy yesterday, and I've had this like 24-hour conversation where he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to CES. Where should I stay?" And he decided this on like Monday, Tuesday of this week, and now the conversation has evolved to, well, do you really think I should go? It's like, and then he started rattling off a list of reasons as to why. And then I said, and because he's a smaller entrepreneur, and he was going to fly out to CES, signed an MOU, and try to do some other deals with other companies of his size and larger. And now he's a little bit like, well, my wife's pregnant. Do you think I should go? And I was kind of like, maybe you should skip it. And I said, maybe you should skip it, and congratulations that your wife's pregnant. And then he comes back like 5 minutes later. He goes, well, if I just hold meetings outside, and I'm like, okay.
That wouldn't work in Canada, Jim. Holding meetings outside in Ontario these days.
We're in Alberta, which is kind of a Western province for Canada. We have a chief medical officer for the province, which is like a state, who gave Christmas advice that, maybe best practice is to hold your Christmas gathering outside. And it's like minus 35 in Canada, in Alberta right now. We're going, only in Canada would your chief medical officer advise double parking and, for your family Christmas. It's like hilarious to really advise this. But I thought, Vegas could actually do that. As a Canadian, I never even need a jacket for CES. Like, it's 60
there are many
degrees.
Outdoor exhibits already.
Yeah.
And Doug, you're going to be visiting most of the space trucks that are outdoors.
Well, the one space thing, it's in the pavilion now. It's in a pavilion, so it's in a semi-enclosed space. I mean, they could open the windows or do whatever. I'm interested to see how they handle that. But to your point, Jim, about weather, I mean, if you're Canadian, it's going to be a balmy, 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's
it's
like
going to drop
summertime
down to 20s at night.
Yeah, that's shorts and t-shirt weather for a Canadian.
I mean, for those of us who aren't Canadian ballers, I mean, I'm kind of like, that's my other concern is like, do I pack my heavy coat for the evening or just say, when the sun goes down, I don't move around at night, which is
what do you need a heavy coat for if you're just going to be staying in your hotel room eating takeout?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I got to go across the street to go to
the restaurant.
No, Pepcom Digital Experience and
Showstoppers.
By the way, does anyone have G2 on Las Vegas on the ground? Are people even wearing masks indoors? Are there mask mandates?
It is a requirement. It's the law in Nevada that you need to be wearing masks indoors. And I expect the convention center and the CES people to be, policing that. Many of the casinos normally give it a buy. They say you have to be wearing a mask all the time unless you're eating and drinking. So somebody's walking around with a half of a can of beer and they keep their mask off. They better be policing that or I'm turning around and going home.
In the casinos, there was a letter that came out from, Nevada State or some Nevada official said, hey, you need to start enforcing, send a letter to the casino saying you must enforce mask wearing. So I think there's a recognition that, people need to do this or else there's going to be a longer term impact upon hospitality, in the next 90 days or so.
And enough of the tech media are staying away, so that's probably going to limit the hot air inside the casinos anyway.
I think this is interesting. And one of the reasons that it's been, in my opinion, large companies making the announcements, and I know there are a number more announcements to come because I've got private communication from large organizations, is they have a legal department and they have a chief risk officer. And the reputational risk for large companies is just too great. Whereas the small companies, the entrepreneurs, the 1 and 2 people, the Eureka Parks, like the entrepreneur is desperate to make it and has no chief risk officer, has no, legal department and looking at reputational risk. So I think this is why it's been a large organization withdrawal, not the tiny
Well,
companies.
Jim, also I would point out, and we started talking about this before, and I'm going to say it again because my background is in journalism, and I completely respect news gathering organizations. But for 3, 4, 5, 6 of the biggest technology news organizations to have simultaneously colluded to pull out at the same time and say, "Don't worry, we're going to cover it virtually," that tells you that they were already planning on whatever coverage that they were planning to give in advance based on whatever PR they were being given and whatever updates they were getting privately. They were never really going to go to the show to cover it anyway. They were not breaking any news. They were just, repeating the pablum that's paying their bills. Any idea that any of these news media, technology media companies that pulled out are journalists just went out with the wind with Omicron. They are absolutely not journalists. They are just going to be covering whatever stories they were getting paid to cover.
Well, I have to disagree a little bit. Like TechCrunch, I can't remember whether it was the editor or the editor-in-chief or whatever who said, we made this decision 2 weeks ago. I don't think anyone wanted to be the first to announce it. It was kind of like, who's going to go first? And who's going to break the ice and be, the baddie? And finally,
Jim,
somebody did, and then they all kind of flooded in on the same day.
You don't say that we've made the decision because we're going to protect our people not to cover the Olympics, but we're going to watch it on TV and report it to you anyway as if we're there, pretending we're there. If they're not going to cover it, they're not going to cover it. If they're going to cover it, they're going to cover it. They can't make this half-hearted. We're not going to be there. We're not going to be doing any investigative work, but we're still going to bring you the story because we know the important points. Wink, wink.
I'm gonna chime in here too as well. Some of the phrases, there are two other streaks in here. Number one is that one publication in particular kind of like juiced their SEO to focus on CES is crumbling before our eyes. Now, probably 5 or 6 days in, probably like 4 days into it, they realized, well, we can't really say it's crumbling before our eyes because we're covering it virtually. So there's been this spin that at some point there were people at a particular publication realized that, hey, this may not be exactly quite the tack we need to take on CES coverage. So they backed off on it. But the other thing I'll mention is I haven't done a deep dive in it, but I've seen some attitudinal things on there's this whole streak of, well, we're sticking into the man, people before profits, don't go to CES. And I've seen that from a couple of reporters at least one publication. And there's this underlying attitude where, circling back to what Dave said, covering CES is not fun. And I think that there are people who have internalized their grudges towards having to go to Vegas every year with 180,000 of their best friends, and it's just like this is payback for them. And
That's a good point.
I'm not saying it's everybody, but
yeah,
I mean,
so David, maybe shifting topics just as we wrap up a little bit. Why couldn't we do a good virtual event? Why couldn't we have an amazing online or audio-based environment? Why couldn't we build something be built in VR? At this point in the game, like, why does it suck? Why do these virtual events suck so badly?
Well, those are two different questions, and it's really important to parse that just a little bit. It's not that we can't; it's that we haven't. Some of the other companies we were talking about, showstoppers, we were talking about Pepcom, they've done an outstanding job, not only putting, the on-demand content available, but having somebody live that you could chat with and having a room that you could get together with fellow reporters and see what's going on. It can be done. I think it's fair to say, even with all of my friends at the CTA, that they did a terrible job with their online presence last year because, making me get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to watch a YouTube video that a manufacturer recorded 3 weeks ago is not what you want in a virtual event. In order for virtual events to be successful, and trust me, I know a little something about video and virtual events, they need to be interactive. You need to be able to talk to people that are in the audience and engage them and answer their questions, at least with a chat going on the side. And if they're not that, then they're boring. And most of the events, and I'm talking about in my industry, in technology and in everything else, most of the events are set up honestly as cash cow money makers. How do we sell the hotel rooms? How do we fill the restaurants? How do we sell the booths? How do we make money with our presence? They don't really care about the virtual attendee. If somebody really wanted to do a great virtual show, they could. We just don't have it yet.
What do you think, Jim? Just what do you think? Have you seen any events that have been good, well done virtually, or are we still stuck in the 20th century of events, virtual events?
Well, to David's point, when we get any new medium, we tend to just take our way of seeing the old medium and apply it, right? So like initial television, black and white was like radio plays, right? Until people go, oh, it's a new medium. There are new things we can do. And I have been involved over the last 2 years. I speak at conferences and seminars for a living. It used to be in person. Now it's all virtual. But I have been involved in some really great online experiences that were highly engaging and interactive, but you can't do the same thing as an in-person event. So you really have to explore how the new medium allows new ways of working, new ways of interacting, new ways of discovery. So for instance, I'll give you one example. I was involved in one online event, and like you go to CES, you're there with 180,000 of your best friends, as Doug was saying, and who you come across is really random, right? But imagine an AI that goes into my Twitter feed, into LinkedIn profile, Facebook, and looks at every post I've ever posted and curates for me the top 100 people that I should meet. And like a Tinder app, but for business people, it does speed dating on what you're most interested in. And so I get to talk to, like, here's the 100 most interesting people from your interests, Jim, out of the 180,000 people. And if they're similarly interested, we'll allow you to speed date for 3 minutes. That would be an enhancement of an in-person event. But are we doing that? That's the question.
I have an island on Second Life I'd like to sell you real cheap. I remember back in the day when there was this publication called Vaughn Magazine back in the 2000s, and the Vaughn events had this whole discussion about how do you do an online event, how do you turn an in-person event into an online event. And that was 20 years ago, and we still don't have a good answer. And I don't think we do have an answer, because it's Jim, I get this, the AI curated thing, but what's the AI? The AI isn't going to give you spontaneity. The AI is not going to give you an aha moment. The AI is basically going to take your preferences and go through your sets of data into your silo. And walking through the aisles of CES, you're not siloed, you're looking around. Okay, so that would be my first point. My second point would be is that when you are physically out of the office, you are focused in a different way, and you're processing in a different way than you are through the virtual world. And God knows I am guilty of this as anybody. I'll be watching something on virtually, and I may be also multitasking on 2 or 3 different things, so I don't fully focus on that. And I think that the virtual world is not going to, the virtual world versus the real world is that we're not, and this is even worse, because now we have the Twitter world of 24/7, squirrel going on. So where you can get diverted. I mean, like diverted for, I could be watching a virtual event, and I may be even focused on that thing for that half hour or so, or that hour or so of virtual press conference. But once I pop out of that, then immediately I'm turning to do something else. And it's not so.
Well, the good news is Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse is going to solve all of these problems, and I can't wait to try it, because it's going to be great.
I'm
People
sure
are
Mark
talking about it.
I'm sure Marcus talked to everybody over at Second Life and absorbed all the lessons learned.
And Evan, I'll tell you the last reason that you don't see a lot of very good, very big virtual conferences is because the internet is the great equalizer. I don't need to pay a CES or any big, large organization if I can simply put out my own stream. Why is theirs any better than mine?
Jim Harris is up to 200 million impressions on Twitter, tweeting about topics around CES.
I had this friend a couple of years ago who was #1 for impressions, 200 million. And I was thinking, that is freaking impossible. How the hell do you do? And here we are this year. I had some spare time because of Omicron,
So you're a
thank you, Omicron.
One-man media machine. So look, I think we're going to wrap it up because we've said all there is to be said, I think, at the moment. And Jim and I are going to be living vicariously through, Doug and Dave, and it's going to be like CES Squid Game edition. We're really going to enjoy sitting back and eating popcorn as you walk through the hall.
I've just had a cancellation email while we were talking, so it's going
to be great.
We'll see what happens between now and Sunday.
Squid Game.
Yeah.
So this is awesome. Well, take care. Strap a camera to your head and live stream it all for us. We look forward to it. All right, everyone.
Got it, guys. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Yep.